Thank you, everybody. And Gard, it looks like you're on and I hope ready to go. So we'll start this up again. And welcome to the home stretch of our 24-hour Urantia-thon. Here is your hourly or so warning about the protocol for the meetings. This meeting is being broadcast live via Facebook. And if you've gone and checked the statistics, you'll see that the first two big meetings have been viewed by more than 1,400 people so far. So if you do not want your face being broadcast out live, turn off your video capabilities now. Mute yourself if you're not speaking so that we don't have your disturbing background noises. Please do not type if you are speaking so we don't hear the clicky clacks. If you'd like to talk, please raise your digital hand or try waving, but there's so many of us, we don't always see the waves. So try raising your digital hand, or, we've done a really good job of just politely introducing ourselves into conversation. So thank you so far. Headphones do help improve sound quality and to reduce background feedback. So I now get to introduce Gard Jameson. Gard has been reading the Urantia book since 1972. He's been leading a study group in Las Vegas, which is now a Zoom group study group since 1985. He is currently serving as a trustee at Urantia Foundation, and he's also the head of the education committee for Urantia Foundation. He's married to Dr. Florence Jameson, who I'm sure is doing some of the most important work in the country right now, and has two daughters, Julia and MJ. Gard, the room is yours.
Chris, thank you so much. And thank you so much to you and Andre and those of your team who put this together. I apologize. I've spent much of the last 24 hours getting back across the border, which got shut down last night at midnight, but I'm here. And I thank all of you for being with me this afternoon. And it is afternoon here in Boulder City, Nevada. It's a lovely day, but quiet on the streets. And I get the privilege of teaching Indian philosophy at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which will now be done by Zoom starting Tuesday. But in India, they have a very interesting tradition. It's called the monsoon meditation. And when the monsoons come, those who are so inclined spend a lot more time in meditation, in communion, in worship. And so I encourage each and every one of you to carpe diem, take the moment and allow these times where we are sequestered, quarantined, otherwise in our homes, to take a little extra time to have a divine appointment with our Heavenly Father. So I thought that we might begin this appointment with that divine appointment with a 3-minute meditation, if you would indulge me. So I have a gong here, and I will go ahead and press the begin. And if you would close your eyes and allow yourself to feel a sense of the Father's presence, to allow it to amplify and magnify your soul in these 3 minutes, it will be a grace and a blessing for all of us. Love is our light and our salvation. Of what shall we be afraid? Enter into the gates with a heart of gratitude and into the courts with worship. May our hearts be filled with the divine presence. May our faces radiate the love of God. And may we learn to be still and know the presence of the divine within each of us. One thing we have asked of God, and that we shall ever seek, that we might behold his beauty and dwell in his holy courts. Amen. So slowly open your eyes and we shall begin. So it was a few years ago, a year after I found the book in 1973, that I had the joy of meeting a fellow by the name of Clyde Bedell. He was giving a talk at a conference in Southern California. And during that talk, he said something which really struck my curiosity chord, which was that he recommended that each of the people at the conference, at least monthly, visit paper 140, the ordination sermon. He said that paper, in his experience, was the most transformative opportunity for a student of the Revelation. And it's here that I want to do what I call the Stephen Colbert, by tip of the hat, wag of the tail to you, Patty McGrath, for also speaking about the Beatitudes. I apologize, I wanted to be with you, but I was on a meeting this morning. But thank you for focusing on the Beatitudes, because I believe that much like the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, this is the Eightfold Path of Jesus. And if we understand those Beatitudes, we have the key to allow us to enter into the gates of God and to experience the quality of personal presence. So I'm going to share a screen. Am I allowed to do that, Chris? So, oh, look at you. There you are. And, okay. And so, this is a little presentation I did locally, which really helped me to frame my focus on the Beatitudes. And as you saw on the first slide, the Beatitudes are Jesus's operating manual. And how many of us would drive our cars or fly an airplane or do anything of significance without an operating manual? And the 8 Beatitudes of Jesus are that operating manual. They are the gateway to the treasures of the kingdom. So I always like to show this slide to my students. I teach, as I shared earlier, at the University of Nevada. And one of the things we do is we read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And this is the famous theologian Calvin. If you've heard of Calvin, oh yes, and his sidekick Hobbes, who was also a great philosopher. But what we know from our revelation is that the universe is friendly and that we are significant and that we have a huge privilege in knowing that. And what I want to suggest to each of you on this call is that most people don't. And so may we have the courage not to let our light be hid under a bushel. So in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl says, he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how, quoting Friedrich Nietzsche. And the Urantia book in so many ways gives us that why. It gives us the context, the frame of reference within which to deal with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, including a pandemic, including virtually anything. And part of our test of faith is to examine how events like this test the boundaries of our own faith. So it was a year ago that my wife and I had the privilege of being in Amsterdam and going to the home of Anne Frank. And a wonderful quote from Anne Frank to begin with here. "I believe in spite of everything that people are still truly good at heart. I simply can't build my hope on a foundation of confusion, misery, and death. If I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come out right. I must uphold my ideals." And so we were there. We were there 77 years after she entered that attic there in Amsterdam, July 6, 1942. We looked out at the same sky that she looked out at. And what we know from the book is that we live on a disordered and disturbed world. And the question for each of us is, what are we going to do with our little moment of time here on this little planet, knowing what we know with this revelation? So the first question we will examine, and many of you have for a lifetime examined this question, but what is faith? And as I'm sure Patty did in her presentation, we'll examine it through the lens of the Beatitudes. And then we have to ask the question, faith in who or what? And what does faith look like? We'll end the presentation by looking at the Beatitudes in the life of our master, our brother and friend, Jesus. So first of all, this is an interesting question. What is faith? Faith in who or what? This was a study done by Baylor University. It's the largest study that's ever been done of a Christian demographic. And the question is, what are the primary attributes of God? And it's very, very interesting if you look at the graph. 32% felt that God was authoritarian or a tyrant or a dictator in some fashion. 24% felt that he was distant. 16% felt that he was critical. And only 23% felt that he was benevolent, but occasionally the 23% said he occasionally gets pissed off. So I often tell my students, I had a dad like that, and I'm not sure that I'm interested in a God like that. And so what I want us as a community to be familiar with is that most Christians either have one of these 3 or 4 points of view. And the 3 are connected: dictator, distant, critical. And by the way, I don't think that all adds up to 100%. I think there's 5% when they did the study who said, we've since become atheists. So this is the image that most people are sporting when they think about God. And one of the brilliance of the revelation is that it gives us an entirely different perspective on the nature of God and the image that we have. So what we have in traditional religion, whether it be Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, is a God of conditional love who is wrathful, right? Who knows wrath and knows how to exhibit it. In the teachings of Jesus, as we all know on the call, we have a God of unconditional love. And those 2 words really, for me, are the Maginot line between the revelation and evolutionary religion as we find it in contemporary Christianity. Most Christians have that conditional sense of God's love, which is very limiting and really forecloses the opportunity of a deep experiential communion with God. So, oh my goodness, faith is to belief. So I'm kind of, Chris, I'm not quite sure how to, faith is not belief, but is related. Faith is to religion what sails are to a ship. And this is the major confusion starting at the turn of the 20th century with the advent of fundamentalism. Faith was turned into a concept of belief. Faith was compromised in terms of its power of healing and transformation, In the Revelation, we get a very different sense of what faith is. Okay. And we're told twice, and I'm always curious, when I get something twice in the Revelation, my ears perk up. But we're told twice, we're given a definition of religion. Religion is faith, trust, and assurance. I encourage you to dive deeply into that definition, because each one of those words is extraordinarily powerful and incredibly important, because the issue with most of modern day religion is most people in those traditions don't feel assurance. Why? Because they regard their God as distant, critical, and authoritarian. So belief is an unplugged battery. Plugged in, belief becomes faith. So you're billing me twice because I'm bipolar. No, it's because you're rechargeable. Jesus taught us that a little humor is important in all of this. Faith is a plugged-in battery. You must be connected to a real source. Good news, turns out it was just your battery. How many of us have experienced that? So faith is not belief. This is really important, and it's really important clarification as we're talking to folks, that they are connected, but they're not the same thing. So my teacher, Thomas Keating, said belief becomes faith when it is connected to divine power. And that's what we're invited to in the context of the Revelation. We're invited to a daily appointment, twice a day. My teacher, Thomas Keating, suggests once a day is maintenance program, twice a day is improvement. And now that we're in this experience of a pandemic, I encourage each of you to think about 3 times a day or even more. Imagine that, being with God. So faith versus belief. Belief is a concept, faith is a living attribute of personal spiritual experience. Belief alone is always limiting and binding, faith is expanding and liberating. Belief intellectualizes, faith realizes. That word realize is a very important word. Belief defines life, faith motivates life. Belief requires words, faith transcends all words. And belief alone disconnects. This is a big one. Faith interconnects. In other words, when we're subject to the domain of belief, we have created a circle around ourselves and our tribe, which necessarily, by definition, excludes the other. And what I've learned from Martin Buber in the Jewish tradition is that when we exclude the other, we turn them into an it. And as we devalue them, we devalue ourselves. So belief alone is actually taking us in absolutely the wrong direction of where we want to go, which is a deep, powerful, transformational experience of God. So my brother Richard Keeler's favorite quote, I think some of you knew Richard, and he was a dear and wonderful brother to me. His favorite quote in the entire book was, "Of God, the most inescapable of all presences, the most real of all facts, the most living of all truths, the most loving of all friends, and the most divine of all values, we have the right to be the most certain of all universe experiences." And I think even on this call, there are some who are not quite so certain of that universe experience. And that's why Jesus invites us to the experience of worship and service as the summation of his gospel. So we get in the Urantia book, I'm sure as Patty outlined, we get a reimagination of the Beatitudes. If you take the Beatitudes from Luke or from Matthew, they're wonderful, they're fabulous, but they don't quite follow a certain pattern. They don't give us the internal logic. And so the internal logic is, as we know from paper 140, the first 4 are the inner dimensions of faith. The last 4 are the outer dimensions of faith. And we will dive into this more deeply. So again, my teacher, Thomas Keating, the Beatitudes are the quintessence of the teachings of Jesus. The Beatitudes describe the healing and transformation of the divine spirit. The quintessence of the teachings. It's very, very interesting. So the inner Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, the humble. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the meek, and blessed are the pure in heart. And the outer, blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the merciful, I add compassionate. Blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are those who are persecuted. Wow, persecuted. So the inner attitudes requires each of us to really seriously consider, what is your contemplative practice? Do you have a daily contemplative practice? I think Peter was the one who said, neglect not your daily worship. So I ask each of you on the call to consider, are you engaging in a daily contemplative practice, daily worship, which we're told in the book, worship makes us increasingly like the being who is worshiped. So what is that practice you engage in? And do you have a deep and powerful experience of God's presence? Do you feel every day of your life, beginning your day, ending your day, that quality of unconditional love that was the proclamation of Jesus' gospel? And do you experience the fruits of the Spirit? Do you experience the fruits of the Spirit? This is a big one, because Paul in Galatians 5:22 and throughout the Urantia book, we're told that there's a quality of blessed assurance associated with our faith journey. And those are the fruits of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, meekness, kindness, goodness, forbearance, self-control, and so on and so forth. Or, now this is maybe a novelty here, do you experience the weeds of the Spirit? What might those be? Paul, Patty, I'm seeing you smile on the screen here. The weeds of the Spirit. And I would suggest to you that most people on the planet today are experiencing the weeds of the Spirit, which are the flip of love, joy, and peace. What's the flip of love, joy, and peace? John says, perfect love casts out all fear. So fear is one of those. Jesus tells us, fear not. And the second is anxiety. We're told that anxiety must be abandoned. And the third is anger. We're told that anger is spirit poison. And how many of us in the last 48 hours have experienced any of those, especially in this moment of pandemic? So blessed are the poor in spirit, the humble, acknowledging our own inner emptiness, for theirs are the treasures of the kingdom. So my good friend Mark Hutchins, who is a wonderful teacher of AA, says this is where it all begins. Until we acknowledge our emptiness, until we acknowledge that we are powerless, until we acknowledge that we surrender ourselves, that we kneel before the Most Highs and before the sovereign presence of God, we are not going anywhere. And so the treasures of the kingdom, right? And so the first step, humility, right? Why is this the first step? My other dear friend and roommate, Jeff Waddles, would always tell me that when we're studying the Revelation, we should be very careful to examine the way in which they are wording. What comes before what? Why is that the first paragraph? Why is that the first beatitude? Why is that the first paper? Why are those words the first sentence? All of that is revelatory, and we should examine why humility is the first step. And again, the treasures in the weeds. What are you experiencing? What is your momentary consciousness at this point? Is there a quality of fear and anxiety and anger? We're told these are weeds. So we got to do a little weed picking here, perhaps in the next couple, 3 months as we move through. So we're told that the consciousness of the spirit domination of a human life is presently attended by an increasing exhibition of the characteristics of the spirit in the life reactions of a spirit-led mortal. For the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and self-control. I encourage and invite you to meditate on each one of those words and to ask yourself. So in my classes, I tell them it's a really simple class and you're all going to do very, very well because it's really just a game show. Door number 1 is anxiety, fear, and anger. And door number 2 is love, joy, and peace. So here's your first pop quiz. How many of you want to stay in door number 1? And I tell my students, don't raise your hand if you do. See me after class. We need to talk. But I tell them that the journey of philosophy, the journey of any genuine philosophy, is a journey of healing and transformation. And that during our time together in the semester, I'm going to give them a few clues as to how we can begin to migrate from door number 1, which is our flesh, if you will, the spirit of the flesh. We're told that we're dual origin creatures, right? So we have this biological origins, but we have a divine destiny. So our biological origins are there in door number one, and they're actually quite good. As an amateur paleontologist, I tell my students, congratulations, 550 million years of evolutionary history, and you are sitting in this room. 60 million going up the tube, and you are sitting in this room. Congratulations. So blessed are they who hunger and thirst for truth and righteousness. So what we know is that we normally, right, breakfast, lunch, dinner, we normally don't go to the meal until there's a certain quality of emptiness. And so there's a certain hunger that's developed within us, which represents that emptiness. So this perhaps is a clue as to why this beatitude follows the first beatitude of humility. Only those who feel poor in spirit will ever hunger for righteousness. And how do we promote such hunger? I think everyone on the call knows, but hopefully everyone in the call is engaged in it. From paper 140, highest levels of self-realization attained by worship and service. So, hunger for truth and righteousness. My friend Richard Rohr says the correct translation of truth and righteousness is justice. And justice really just means fairness, fairness on the planet, fairness in relation to our friendly universe, fairness in relation to each other, which is really the manifestation of the levels of spirit. So we're told spiritual progress predicated on intellectual recognition of spirit poverty, coupled with the self-consciousness of perfection hunger, desire to know God and be like him, the wholehearted purpose to do the will of the Father in heaven. Now raise your hand if you want to do those things. Right? Everybody raise your hand. And if you're not visible, right? And any of you who didn't raise your hand, see me after. Oh, James, I love you. You are my brother. Any of you that did not raise your hand, see me after class. Blessed are the meek. This is, oh, Dana raised his hand. Good for you, Dana, my former roommate. Dana, bless you. Blessed are the meek, spiritual forbearance. This is a confusing one for many people. And again, I'm sure Patty elaborated. Meekness is not humility. It's related to humility, but it's not humility. It's actually at the core of what we call the Stoic philosophy of bear and forbear, which means to be patient and kind. In Corinthians, Paul defines love as patience and kindness. So it's developing an attitude that in the most difficult of trials in our life, in the middle of a pandemic, as I got back across the border, this morning I went to the grocery store and I had the experience that I'm sure many of you have had, which is I think it's going to be fig leaves I'm going to be using at the toilet because everything is gone. So how to be patient and kind in the midst of that kind of difficulty. This is the attitude that Jesus was calling on us. And we've all had trials and tribulations in our life. And this quality of meekness or gentleness is really an exhibition of the Spirit. And if it's not there, we need to take a look. So we say that it's different than humility. We develop this attitude. How? By actually stepping out in the world and having that patience and kindness tested. And what does it mean when they say that they shall inherit the earth? And again, I apologize for stepping on your toes, Patty, if you talked about this, but I suggest to you that it's not Putin who's all of a sudden going to become meek, who's going to become the inheritor of the earth. It's actually pointing to the culture of light and life, that the culture of light and life will be one in which all persons from all places will exhibit a quality of meekness. And blessed are the pure in heart, the sincere. What is purity of heart? This is a very interesting question as well. And what does it mean to see God? Leviticus, where we're told Moses was told, no one shall see God and live. And that we're told in the book to see God means to acquire true spiritual insight. And also that spiritual insight is manifested by an increasing love, a love of a fatherly affection, not just a brotherly affection. And we all know that the line that I'm so mad I can't see straight, right? So that's anger. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that the weeds get in the way of our seeing. So we can be so anxious that we don't see God. We can be so fearful that we don't see God. These are the weeds that get in our way. These are the, if you will, the ocular malfunctions that don't allow us to experience the fullness of God's presence, which, golly, God is in us. Spirit of truth is in us. The Holy Spirit is in us. What is the problem? Must be something on their side. Not. So consider our attitudes. And then the outer. Who do you serve, right? There are 4 yogas in India. The Karma Yoga asks the question, who do you serve? And do you do it selflessly? Do you have a service project in your life? Do you have a service program in your life? My wife and I, 10 years ago, started what's called Volunteers in Medicine. We were being told that people were toe tagged to natural death at the age of 30, 35, 40 with chronic diabetes and with heart disease and with all kinds of chronic disease. And we, in quoting the great philosopher, I'm sure you all know this philosopher, Chris Rock, said, that's not right. That's not true. Those are not natural deaths. But each of us in our own way has to find our venue of service. And it's not just a one-on, it's a constant attitude of service. And then I ask you to recall the last time that you mourned. What did it feel like? And do you experience compassion for the suffering of others, both human and non-human? Can you feel the suffering of the non-human communities on our planet? If you haven't seen it, there's a wonderful documentary called Unity. A couple of cows who are in the slot, they're heading toward their death, and the second cow, after it sees or hears what the first cow's been through, tries to turn. Well, that convinced us to be a little more vegetarian in our life. So again, to take a look at how we process our food, how we process our relationships, how we process politically, socially, religiously. And are you a peacemaker at all times? This is the ultimate expression of God's will, and it comes uniquely to each of us. And are you able to suffer persecution without negative emotional reaction? So blessed are those who mourn, spiritual sensitivity. And this again is the leading edge. It's the front runner or the head of the sled on the outer dimension of the Beatitudes. And it's very interesting that this should be the first thing Jesus says. And we're told in the book, it's developing an emotional attitude of tenderheartedness. Can we keep our heart open? Can we keep it tender? I constantly have this conversation with my brother who says it's all about tough love. And I try to quote Lao Tzu, who says, no, water's better than tough love, better than rocks, right? Water made the Grand Canyon, but it's an emotional attitude of tenderheartedness. Do we have that? And do we have that for each and every person that we see? I was reading yesterday, Jesus, when he went to the temple the first time, and you all may recall, and for a moment, just draw in your imagination, Jesus there walking through that temple, watching the slaughter of the animals, and asking those poignant questions to Dad. Why? Why? Can we feel his heart breaking open? I always ask my students, how many of you have had a broken heart? And virtually everybody raises their hand, and I always respond by saying, congratulations, congratulations. That is a gift. And to allow that heart to expand, we have to be vulnerable and tenderheartedness. Difference between sympathy and empathy, we say in compassion work, empathy is really getting inside the soul of the other. And do we have the resiliency? Have we weeded our garden enough that we can actually step into the experience of the other and feel the pain of the other? That's what we're being called to. So blessed are the merciful, the compassionate, spiritual caring. At our clinic, we call it a culture of compassionate caring, not just caring, but compassionate caring, which means we're able to step into the experience of the other and to feel just a little bit of their pain and allow our heart to be broken and transformed. So mercy or compassion, they shall obtain mercy. So this follows mourning, right? This follows the mourning. So again, kind of like the emptiness of humility comes the hunger for truth or righteousness or justice. So following the broken heart comes the capacity or the ability to be compassionate or merciful. So again, we should not be afraid. This is why Jesus said, fear not, abandon all anxiety, be not anxious, right? Anger is spirit poison. Those who carry those qualities of emotional reaction are actually doing great harm to their bodies. Their immune systems are being compromised. Their soul systems are being compromised. Everything is being compromised. So Amy Gross, the comedian, said, this is like drinking poison and thinking you've killed somebody else. How stupid is this? So how do we develop this quality of compassion and mercy? Again, I suggest you by opening our hearts, by allowing ourselves to feel that broken heart. And when we do that, we would like to say that compassion is really the attitude of engagement. It is the willingness to be engaged in the quality of suffering on our planet. And we all know that most of us on this call live in first world countries. Most of us don't know, really don't know how deep suffering can go. So thinking of Anne Frank, we were watching a film on the way back last night, A Hidden Life, about a conscientious objector in Austria. Breaks your heart. And it calls us to redouble our dedication and our efforts to be peacemakers. So we're told again in the book, personal peace integrates personality, social peace prevents, oh my goodness, look what's there. Fear, greed. Greed is just another name for anxiety and anger. Those social weeds. Peacemaking is the cure of distrust and suspicion. So does anybody remember what the middle word on the definition of religion is? Religion is faith, trust, and assurance, right? So peacemaking is the cure of distrust and suspicion. So again, we have an opportunity to really help people see that there's a way of turning around and really engaging that quality of unconditional love that empowers us to be peacemakers. So we just have to step out of our comfort zone. And then twice, not once, but twice, Jesus says, blessed are you when you're persecuted and reviled. Well, what kind of a friendly universe are we living in? I don't get it. But this is what invariably happens, right? If we read the history of the great ones, whether it's Jesus or Socrates or Mahatma Gandhi, we know invariably that they get reviled and persecuted. When we first went into county commission halls to suggest our free and charitable clinic for those without health care, we had probably 300 neighbors who came up and said, not in my backyard. And they were very vociferous. So we want to know that there will be a quality of persecution. And like, if you haven't seen the movie A Hidden Life, I encourage you to. Sometimes you don't experience it so much here, but you will experience the blessedness of God's presence. And so this is just one moment of break. And I'll take just a couple of questions because I have another section here. Does anybody have any burning questions they want to ask? Again, keep it short if you would. And let's engage for a moment. Patty, I'm looking at you. Any reflections?
We approach this in different ways, Gard, but complementary ways.
Good.
I will give my presentation to Chris for publication if you will give yours.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think that our individual approaches to spiritual comprehension are so important. Each one of us has something wonderful to contribute and can touch the mind and heart of another in a way that no one else can.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for doing this. I am really glad we're complimenting each other
Oh,
on
beautiful.
this.
Oh, look at that. Chris has a young son of God next to him. Actually, young son of Chris. Hello, son of Chris.
Chris, you're muted.
Yeah. So thank you, Patty. Yeah, I tell my students, one of my teachers, Thomas Berry, who wrote a great book called The Universe Story, that there are really only three principles that guide and govern the universe. And we get these three principles in the Urantia book: unity, diversity, and the word autopoiesis, which is basically the equivalent of God's will, that God has a will for each of our lives. But how boring it would be, right, Patty, if we walked through a garden and it was just roses or just daffodils or just vincas, right? Diversity is so beautiful. Jim,
God likes our individuality.
exactly. James, very quickly, because I got to get to Jesus. If I don't get to Jesus, I'm not gonna get to heaven very well. So go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make a comment that while we are thinking about the devastating effect of this pandemic, we should also realize that this is one of the greatest opportunities to see God outpouring as we are beginning to see how people show forth their loving kindness to people who are disadvantaged. We should keep that in mind also.
James, that is so true. That is so true. And again, it's a moment for all of our hearts to be broken. All right. So right now we have our Down syndrome niece. Her mother died from cancer and her father recently passed away from cancer as well. But she's living with us full time, and she is highly vulnerable, as James knows, to this pandemic. So we are keeping her under wraps. But I'm just brokenhearted because she has a facility that she just loves to go to with all the other kids every day, and that facility has been closed down. So it's a tough time. But it's a time, as James says, to let our hearts be broken open, wide open, pressed down. So the Eightfold Path of Jesus.
Nice picture, Gard.
What's that? Hey, Mo.
Nice picture.
It is. It's your buddy Greg Olson.
Yep.
Yep. And he was a man of gladness. And so, as we're told, the sum and substance of Jesus' religion, worship and service. This is the gospel. Experiencing inwardly, each of us, I hope you are, experiencing God as a Father of unconditional love. And in whatever venue of service you're involved with, you're engaging not only humanity, but also the non-human communities of our planet. The great German philosopher Schopenhauer said, you want to know who the devil is for animals? I think you all know the answer to that. And this leads to blessed assurance, the fruits of the Spirit, and away from the weeds of the Spirit, anger, fear, anxiety. So a quality of inner communion and a quality of outer service. I don't know who was involved in creating this picture of Mo Siegel, but it's one of my favorites. We all know the woman at the well and the service that was rendered to her by our master in that moment. And what we know is that she had her heart broken, didn't she? It was opened up in his presence in a way that allowed her to go on and be one of the great disciples of the kingdom. And one of Mo's other great pictures. Mo, you're going to see a few pictures here that you're familiar. Again, what is our contemplative practice? Do you have a contemplative practice? If you do not, please go to contemplativelife.org or to contemplativeoutreach.org and get yourself a contemplative practice. Once a day maintenance, twice a day improvement. I think I saw Bobby Dreyer somewhere on the screen. Right, Bobby? Okay, so blessed are the poor in spirit. Do you all remember this scene? What is this scene, Mo?
What is it?
Yeah.
Pretty obvious, Gard.
I know, that's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, well, Jesus is washing their feet at the Last Supper.
Yeah, and who's he washing first?
I don't remember.
He's washing the one who is probably very proud, Peter. Remember, Peter said, don't wash my feet. And then Jesus said, well, if you don't let me wash your feet, you'll have no part in the kingdom. And then very funnily, right? That's a word, is it, Mo? Funnily. Peter said, not only my feet, but my head. Let's do the whole thing. How about a shower, master? And blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So we know that Jesus spent a lot of time in communion. He woke up early, he went to bed late. Spent a lot of time in communion, not just communing with God, worshiping God, but also praying for others. And so we can each in our own way engage in practices of loving kindness, praying for family and friends, for co-workers in the kingdom, for people we're going to meet today who we haven't even met, for people with whom there's tension, for people who are, if you will, in a place of deep suffering on the planet, and for people who've gone ahead. Blessed are the meek. Be not weary in well-doing. Again, Jesus wanted us to step it up. As James says, even in this moment of pandemic, to step up our game and to redouble our dedication to the Father's will. And blessed are the pure in heart, a childlike attitude, which doesn't have those weeds of anger and fear and anxiety, but sees with a quality of purity. The word sincerity is an interesting word. It comes from the Latin word sine cere, which means without wax, to take the wax out of our ears. Jesus exhibited the outer Beatitudes, and it requires courage and wisdom to so serve. And that comes, as we know, from our inner contemplative practice. So blessed are those who mourn. Jesus' heart was broken so many times when his father Joseph was killed, when he was there at the temple with his father Joseph, when he was watching over the garden, from the Garden of Gethsemane over the city of Jerusalem. So many times he mourned. So many times his heart was broken. One of my favorite pictures, Mo's and my favorite artist, Greg Olson. And blessed are the merciful, the compassionate, who actually engage in acts of compassion, who are willing to step out of their comfort zone, who are willing to engage in a quality of forgiveness. We're told on 206:4, abounding love, unfailing forgiveness, and matchless goodwill. And blessed are the peacemakers. This one's very interesting. Was this Carl Bloch, I think, Mo? Who
Yep.
did this one? Look at the eye of the soldiers. Look at the eye of the soldier. And do you see the weeds of the spirit there in his eyes? Do you see fear and anxiety and anger? And what do you see in Jesus's eyes? I don't see any weeds. Do you, James? No weeds there. And blessed are you when you have faith. This was Jesus's ascension from the Mount. It's, I think, one of your favorite paintings, Mo. Again, just before.
Gard, do you want to know what that painting was?
Go ahead.
It's when they went down in Gethsemane, and he took the 11 of them up on the rock with the moonlight shining on him. And then after, this was the last group prayer.
Right.
And then after that, they went back into Gethsemane and he got arrested.
Yeah.
And this is a Michael Dudash painting.
Yeah. And the phenomenal thing, my friends, is that what was he praying? Take a look at that prayer. He was actually praying that their joy might be full. He knew he was going to be killed the next morning. He had plenty of reasons to be fearful, but he prayed for the joy of his disciples, and he also prayed for those who would come after his disciples. So this is the life and teachings of Jesus. This is the Eightfold Path. This is the universe journey that we're all a part of. It is, as I tell people, this book, right? It's a long book, but it's nothing more nor less than an invitation to an experience of God's unconditional love and the opportunity of service, which is the only way in which we can experience that fullness of God's love. And all that is required of us is an attitude of faith. And again, if you look up faith is in the book, it's very interesting. You don't really get head-on definitions of faith. I think the 8 Beatitudes are the closest we get to the appreciation of what Jesus was meaning by faith. And so I thank you for your time this afternoon, and what a blessing. And Chris, again, thank you, and Andre and your team for putting this whole thing together. We will all be seeing more Zoom Mo is an aficionado of the stock market, and he has been regretting that he didn't buy Zoom months ago because it's the only thing that's going up right now. But we will be doing Zoom conferences in July from Urantia Foundation. We'll be doing a Zoom retreat, an online virtual retreat, where we will have a chance to do contemplative practices, to share a variety of contemplative practices, and to engage. And we'll be doing so much more. You know, we have a summer conference coming up. I don't know what the upshot of that's going to be, but we may have a virtual international conference. It's the first of its kind if it goes through. So again, thank you all. Any final questions or comments?
One comment I'd like to make.
6 minutes, right, Chris?
One comment I'd like to make.
6
Okay.
minutes.
Concerning prayer, it's a benefit that I don't think we're most aware of, but when you pray for someone that you're in a relationship with, you're the one who receive the greatest impact from that, because all of those values that you praying for the other person, you experience yourself. So there's a benefit for praying for others. You enjoy those values yourself. You gain greater insight into the problem that you're trying to seek to help the person with.
Thank you, James. Spoken like a physician of the soul.
I want to take an opportunity, and this probably comes from all of us, Mo. Thank you for putting together the untold story of Jesus. Thank you for that gift. You have enlivened the life and times of Jesus for so many who are not going to read the life and times of Jesus in the Urantia book. You have touched lives of which you have no concept. One thing I noticed, I don't know how you found the artists or where they're connected, but somehow, some way, they all painted the same man.
Thank you, Patty. You warmed my heart with that. And we are hearing, by the way, from a lot of people that non-readers, I've given the book to a lot of non-readers and they really like it, and they don't quibble about it being the Urantia book. The paintings make it feel familiar, so they feel safe. Thank you for saying that. It was a blessing to work on that 10-year project.
This is your 5-minute break. Go get some water or continue your discussion, but 5-minute warning and 5-minute break.
Ralph,
Gard, I wanted to say hello.
I just like to say amen to what Patty said about that book. But I do have a little personal note I'd like to share with you. When we were in Israel 2 years ago at Easter time, we were staying at a monastery up very near the Mount of the BeAttitudes, and there was a beautiful chapel there. And one morning, things were quiet. I found a quiet corner in the chapel, and I read the entire Sermon on the Mount. And I'm not normally a very emotional person, but I must admit that was a very meaningful and moving experience. So if you have an opportunity to do that, by all means.
thank you
Gard,
very much, Ralph.
this is Roger Paul. I don't know if you remember me. I came up to to Chicago for your worship session years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but I'm still using the techniques you taught us up there. That must have been 4 or 5 years ago by now. But I just wanted to tell you what a blessing it was to come up there and meet you. And I still enjoy the process that you taught us up there while I was up in Chicago.
Thank you, Roger. As the psalmist says, taste and see that the Lord is good.
That's right. That's right. Thanks.